Have you ever felt that revolt when you saw someone being humiliated for no reason? That feeling of injustice that makes your blood boil, as if you were in the person's shoes? Now, imagine this humiliation happening to one of the greatest living legends. Yes, we are talking about Snoop Dogg. He entered the casino without attracting attention, just wanting to have fun. But an arrogant billionaire thought he could belittle him, mock him, as if he were some stranger. What he didn't know was that night, the game would turn in a way that no one could have imagined. Do you know when someone thinks they are untouchable, above everything and everyone? Because this billionaire believed that money bought respect, that he could treat anyone with contempt without ever suffering the consequences. But what happened next proved that fate has incredible ways of righting wrongs. The turnaround was so absurd, so unbelievable, that everyone there was left with their mouths open. Arrogance was punished in the most epic way possible, and humiliation changed sides. But before telling you what happened, I want to know about you. Have you ever witnessed an injustice and hoped that karma would act? Leave a comment in the comments if you've been through something similar, because this story will prove to you that the world really does turn around. The casino was lit up like a movie scene, with bright lights reflecting off the crystal chandeliers, while the sounds of chips clinking and roulette wheels spinning echoed through the hall. Men in impeccable suits and women dressed with the highest level of sophistication circulated around the room, carrying glasses of champagne, throwing exorbitant amounts of money as if they were loose change. It was a place where money spoke loudest and arrogance dominated the air. In the midst of all this ostentation, Snoop Dogg entered without attracting much attention. No security guards around, no flashbulbs or a big fanfare announcing your arrival. He was wearing a stylish sweatshirt, baggy pants, and a cap tilted to one side. To anyone there, he looked like just another guy who had wandered in by chance. But for those who actually knew who he was, his presence carried far more weight than any number on the poker chips that night. As he walked around the room, Snoop calmly observed the tables, taking his time without needing to prove anything to anyone. He already had everything. Fame, respect, a solid career, and a fortune that few there could match. But he wasn't there to show off wealth or to impress anyone. He just wanted to have fun, play a few games and relax. But as always happens in places where ego is worth more than dignity, not everyone thought the same way. A few feet away, a man watched Snoop with a look of contempt. He was a billionaire known for his arrogance, one of those who think they are superior just because they have more money than they can spend. He saw fortune as a free pass to humiliate whoever he wanted, to step on others without fear of the consequences. For him, money not only bought material goods, but also the right to treat anyone as he saw fit. When Snoop approached the poker table, the billionaire's eyes glittered with a mixture of mockery and malice. He smirked as if he was already planning something in his mind. For him, seeing a guy dressed casually there among Wall Street tycoons and Middle Eastern sheikhs was almost offensive. "Are you sure this game is for you?" he said, his voice full of sarcasm. Snoop, always calm, just raised an eyebrow and smiled slightly. He was already used to this type of treatment. All his life, he had to deal with people who underestimated who he was, who thought they could judge him based on his appearance. But the rapper knew that the best way to deal with these types of people was not with words, it was with actions. The billionaire looked at the other players around the table, as if expecting approving laughter. Some smiled, others preferred to remain neutral, but no one dared to interrupt. It was as if everyone was waiting to see how far this would go. "Let's see if you can actually sit here," continued the billionaire, taking a stack of chips and throwing them on the table with disdain. "I hope you have something other than style to bet on." What the billionaire didn't know, and what made this situation even more interesting, was that Snoop Dogg was an experienced player. He knew the game, he knew how to read opponents, and above all, he knew how to stay calm under pressure. The billionaire's arrogance only made the victory all the sweeter. Snoop slowly pulled out his chair, sitting down with a relaxed smile on his face. He took his chips, piled some in front of him, and said in his characteristic voice, "I think I can have some fun." The table was set, the betting was about to start, but what no one there knew was that that night wouldn't be just another match. It would be a night of upheaval, where poetic justice would manifest itself in a way that no one could have predicted. So what would you do if you were in Snoop's shoes? Would you respond right away or let the game do the talking for you? Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated and then proved that appearances can be deceiving? Tell me in the comments, because I read each one and want to know your opinion. Respect is something that cannot be bought, and this story proves exactly that. Money can open doors, but it will never erase the arrogance of those who think they are superior to others. Here we like justice, twists and turns that show that no one is above destiny. So if you also believe that the world goes around and that true greatness lies in humility, then leave a like, because this helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring more stories like this. If you are not yet part of our community, sign up now and activate the bell. Because here we always bring stories that move us, that show that life teaches lessons in the most unexpected way possible. And now, hold on tight, because the next part will show you what exact moment when the game started to turn. The billionaire thought he had everything under control, that he could humiliate Snoop Dogg and come out on top. But what happened next made the entire casino stop to watch. Get ready, because the twist that comes next is simply unbelievable. The billionaire leaned back in the soft leather chair, holding a cigar in his left hand and a glass of very expensive whiskey in his right. His gaze carried a mix of superiority and boredom, as if he was always waiting for something or someone to entertain his inflated ego. In that luxurious environment, he was treated like royalty. Casino employees knew his name, croupiers smiled as he approached, and less experienced gamblers watched him with respect, or perhaps fear. For him, money was not just a resource, it was a weapon, a form of domination. Anyone who was there and didn't demonstrate the same level of power and influence was simply not worthy of his attention. But then, something broke that bubble of arrogance. He noticed Snoop Dogg at the table. The rapper didn't wear a tailored suit or sport a diamond-studded watch like the other players. He didn't sport extravagant jewelry or a retinue of assistants running after him. He was just there, calm, with his serene and confident energy, ready for a night of fun. But for the billionaire, that was an insult. How could someone so casual, without the posture he considered appropriate, dare to sit at his table? The billionaire raised an eyebrow and let out a dry laugh. He tapped the cigar against the crystal ashtray and leaned forward slightly, looking Snoop up and down. "Are you sure this game is for you?" he said, with a tone full of sarcasm. The provocation was like a crack in the room. Some players exchanged discreet glances, while others smiled sideways, anticipating a spectacle. The billionaire loved this type of scene. He enjoyed humiliating those he considered inferior, testing how far he could go before the person reacted. Snoop Dogg just looked up, gave a slight smile and rested his elbow on the table. "Why do you think it is not?" The billionaire laughed, shaking his head as if he had heard something completely absurd. "This game is not for everyone. Here we play big, very loud, and from what I see, you don't seem like the type to keep up with that level." The phrase carried a venom disguised as a joke. He wanted to destabilize Snoop. He wanted to get a reaction, a sign of discomfort. But Snoop Dogg wasn't just anyone. He had already faced too much in his life to be shaken by this kind of cheap psychological game. The rapper took out some chips, twirled one between his fingers, and without taking his eyes off the billionaire, pushed a stack to the center of the table. "So, I guess we'll find out now." The croupier began dealing cards, and the game began. But for the billionaire, that was still not enough. He wanted more. He needed to prove his point. "Do "Do you know what I like most about this game?" said the billionaire, taking a quick look at his cards before looking back at Snoop. "It's not the money. This, for me, is just a hobby. What I really like is seeing who really has the stomach to play at this level. Who knows how to maintain composure when the stakes rise. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about chips, it's about who can stay on top." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air, and then cast a condescending look at Snoop Dogg. "Are you sure you can handle this?" The table was silent. Everyone waited to see how Snoop Dogg would react. But he didn't say anything right away. He just picked up his glass, took a sip of his drink, and let out a light laugh, as if he was having fun with it all. "Man, I've seen everything in this life. I've played at much harder tables than this, and believe me, I always left in my own time." The billionaire narrowed his eyes, feeling that his attempt to destabilize the rapper was not working as he had hoped. He needed something stronger, something that would really mess with his opponent's ego. "Well, since you insist, let's make this interesting." He grabbed a handful of chips and threw them into the center of the table, doubling the bet. The other players looked at him in surprise, but no one dared to question. "Let's see who really belongs at this table." The game continued, but now with a different weight. It wasn't just a question of money. It was a question of pride, of hierarchy. The billionaire wanted to prove that Snoop Dogg didn't belong there. But what he didn't know was that he was about to learn one of the most humiliating lessons of his life. The mood around the table began to change. The constant buzz of the casino gradually died down, as if the people around realized that something different was about to happen. The billionaire continued with that arrogant smile on his face, throwing his chips with contempt and letting out small laughs every time Snoop Dogg made a move. He felt in control. For him, this wasn't just a poker game, it was a private show, where he was the protagonist, and Snoop was nothing more than an extra about to be humiliated. But Snoop Dogg, always calm, showed no sign of irritation. He didn't respond to provocations. He didn't make a point of justifying himself. He didn't react with indignation. He just watched. He kept his gaze steady, relaxed, as if the billionaire's every word was nothing more than background noise. And that, more than any aggressive response, began to deeply bother the opponent. The billionaire wanted a show. He wanted to get a reaction. But Snoop Dogg knew that the best game is won with patience. With each round, the billionaire increased his bets. He threw chips into the center of the table with force, as if to make it clear that this was his territory. It made a point of acting like a predator that surrounded its prey, leaving small traps in its path. And every time Snoop followed the bet without hesitation, the billionaire scoffed. "I've seen many players try to bluff, but this is one of the worst." "Are you sure you know what you are doing?" said the billionaire, laughing as he took a sip of whiskey. "Or are you just trying to impress me?" Some players around the table exchanged glances. It was obvious that the billionaire was pushing the envelope, testing Snoop Dogg's limits, but no one wanted to intervene. The casino was a place where the richest dominated, and no one there wanted to disagree with such a powerful man. So all that was left was to watch, as if they were facing a silent duel between a king and a challenger who dared to enter his kingdom. The billionaire leaned forward, narrowing his eyes and speaking in a lower, almost conspiratorial tone. "I'll give you a chance to get out of this without losing too much. If I were you, I would take what little you have left and leave now, before this gets embarrassing." Another attempt to destabilize Snoop, another psychological blow that failed. The rapper just raised an eyebrow and laughed softly, as if he found the whole situation pathetic. He knew what he was doing. He knew the billionaire was desperate to prove a point. But what the tycoon didn't understand was that a player's true strength doesn't lie in how much money he has, but in his ability to control the game. The dealer announced the next round and dealt the cards. The billionaire took his and looked quickly, unable to disguise the gleam of satisfaction that passed through his eyes. He thought he already had victory assured. He adjusted himself in his chair and then did something unexpected. He increased the bet absurdly. He threw a colossal number of chips onto the table, more than anyone that night had dared to bet. The surrounding players held their breath. This wasn't just an ordinary move, it was a direct challenge. He wanted to force Snoop Dogg to quit. He wanted to push him out of the game in a humiliating way. If Snoop didn't cover the bet, he would have to leave the table, and the billionaire would have the satisfaction of having defeated him without even having to reach the end of the match. But Snoop Dogg didn't budge. He looked at the chips, looked at the billionaire, and for a brief moment was silent. It was as if he was letting the weight of that bet hang in the air, allowing everyone there to feel the importance of the moment. Then, without saying a word, he grabbed a handful of chips and pushed them into the center of the table. The billionaire was visibly surprised. He didn't expect Snoop Dogg to have the courage to follow through on his bet. For an instant, the smile disappeared from his face, replaced by a confused expression, as if he couldn't understand how the man he so underestimated was still there, firm, without showing any sign of weakness. Silence took over the casino. Players at other tables began to approach, realizing that something big was about to happen. Employees stopped what they were doing to watch the game. The tension was almost palpable. The billionaire, trying to regain control of the situation, forced a smile and shook his head. "Okay, do you want to play like this? So let's see where this goes." He took more chips and this time doubled the bet. A murmur of astonishment spread throughout the hall. It was a risky move, but the billionaire didn't want to back down. He needed to win. He couldn't bear the idea of losing to someone who, in his eyes, shouldn't even be there. Snoop Dogg, once again, remained serene. He knew this was the crucial moment. The billionaire was making the biggest mistake a player can make, playing out of ego, not strategy. Victory would not come from the money he had on the table, but rather from his inability to accept that he was not as untouchable as he imagined. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to intimidate you, thinking they had absolute control of the situation? Have you ever seen someone being arrogant and had the feeling that sooner or later they were going to end up getting a taste of their own medicine? Tell me here in the comments, because this story is far from over. The billionaire thought he was in charge, but what happened on the next play made everyone in the casino stop and watch. The game was about to turn in ways he could never have imagined. The tension at the poker table reached an unbearable level. The silence that was once filled with the clink of index cards and the rustle of cards now seemed overwhelming. The billionaire, with his unwavering confidence, pushed a tower of chips into the center of the table. His eyes shone with a mix of superiority and challenge. He wasn't just gambling money. He was trying to assert his dominance, to make it clear to everyone that here in this territory he was king. He gave Snoop Dogg a teasing look, leaning forward slightly, like a predator closing in on its prey. "Let's see if you have the courage to cover this bet." His voice carried a mocking tone, as if he was already sure of the answer. After all, in his mind, Snoop Dogg had already gone too far. He believed that the rapper was just holding back out of stubbornness, that at some point reason would speak louder and he would give up. But Snoop Dogg, calm as ever, showed no sign of hesitation. With a slight smile on the corner of his lips, he looked at the billionaire's chips, then at his own. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, awaiting his response. And then, without saying a word, he picked up an even larger stack of chips and pushed it into the center of the table. "Not only do I cover," he said, pausing for a moment, letting the tension build, "but I increase it." The impact of those words was immediate. There was a murmur in the casino. Players at other tables began to turn around. Casino employees looked at each other, and even those who were just watching leaned in to get a better look at what was going on. It was as if a silent earthquake had just shaken the surroundings. The billionaire, who until then was laughing and mocking, froze for a second. It wasn't what he expected. He blinked a few times, as if trying to process the situation. And then, forcing a smile, he let out a short, dry laugh. "That's a mistake, my friend," he said, shaking his head as if he were about to witness an announced tragedy. He turned to the other players as if seeking complicity. Some smiled tensely, others just watched in silence. Nobody wanted to get involved. Everyone knew that that moment was decisive. The dealer continued dealing cards, the game progressed, and the billionaire's expression began to change. He was trying to maintain his composure, but something was wrong. He looked at his cards, looked at the chips on the table, and then shot quick glances at Snoop Dogg, who remained impassive, as if he was exactly where he wanted to be. The truth was that at that moment, the billionaire began to realize something he didn't want to admit. He was no longer in control. Throughout his life, money was his shield, his weapon, his symbol of power. He has always used wealth to intimidate, to dominate, to make others feel small. But there at that table, in front of a man who was unfazed by his psychological moves, he felt for the first time a real threat. He tried to regain control, releasing yet another provocation. "You know you're betting against someone who could lose millions and not even miss it, right?" But Snoop Dogg's response was even more devastating than any play in poker. "Money comes and goes," said the rapper, with the calm of someone who has seen everything in life. "But respect is something you can't buy." The phrase hit the billionaire like an invisible punch. It was a truth so simple, so direct, that he didn't know how to respond. For the first time, the audience around the table let out small expressions of surprise. People who were previously just watching were now completely engaged. And then the billionaire did something unexpected. To try to reassert his power, to try to show that he was still in charge, he did the only thing he had left. He pushed all his chips into the center of the table. All in. The hall erupted in murmurs. That was the decisive moment. The billionaire was betting everything he had on the table in a last-ditch effort to crush Snoop Dogg and reassert his dominance. If Snoop Dogg lost, he would leave humiliated. But if he won, well, then the billionaire would be in serious trouble. Snoop Dogg, however, showed no surprise. He just smiled slightly, looked at his cards, then at the billionaire, and without saying anything pushed his chips to the center. The bet was made. The game had reached its climax, and at that moment, the entire casino stopped. Players stopped their own games to watch. Casino employees held their breath, and even security guards stood at attention. This wasn't just a poker game anymore. It was a clash of pride, a clash of different worlds. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone try to use money or status to humiliate others? Have you ever been in a situation where you hoped karma would act at the right time? Tell me here in the comments, because this story is getting more and more unbelievable. The next episode of this epic twist. Because what comes next is going to leave everyone open-mouthed. The billionaire thought the game was won, but what happened next made the entire casino shake. The silence inside the casino was absolute. The weight of the billionaire's final bet, his confident gesture in pushing all the chips to the center of the table, made everyone hold their breath. The tension was almost palpable. The eyes turned to the dealer, who began to reveal the cards slowly, one by one, as if he was prolonging the agony of the moment. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms with a smirk. For him, victory was already certain. After all, he always won. You always had control. But something was wrong. The first pair of open letters were no longer as favorable as he imagined. His smile faded, But there was still confidence. He took a deep breath, maintaining his posture. Snoop Dogg, on the other hand, didn't even move. His gaze was fixed on the center of the table, observing with the calm of someone who already knew the result. The dealer turned over the next card. A slight reaction took over the surrounding public. People began to exchange glances. Some whispered among themselves. The billionaire frowned as if something wasn't right. He looked at his own cards again, as if trying to see from a new angle could change reality. But the reality was one. Another card turned over. The murmur in the hall increased. Some players who were watching leaned forward, engrossed in what was happening. A casino security guard, who until then had just been watching from afar, approached, crossing his arms and shaking his head as if he already knew what was about to happen. The tension reached its peak when the last card was turned over. And at that exact moment, the table exploded with reactions. Snoop Dogg had the best possible hand. He not only won the round, he completely destroyed the billionaire. There was a second of absolute shock. The billionaire froze, blinking repeatedly as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mind tried to process the information, tried to find a logical explanation, but there was none. He simply lost millions in a single play. The laughter began slowly, timidly, coming from a corner of the table. One of the players let out a muffled laugh, unable to contain his disbelief. And then, like a wave, the reactions began to grow. Some people were open-mouthed. Others laughed in disbelief at what they were seeing. Murmurs filled the room. "It can't be," the billionaire muttered almost to himself. He leaned forward, looked at the cards more closely as if hoping to find a mistake. But there was no mistake. Snoop Dogg was still in the same place, without changing his expression. He just watched everything, as if he already knew that this would be the outcome from the moment he sat at that table. The billionaire, who minutes before was exuding arrogance, who laughed at Snoop and made provocations, was now silent, no reaction, speechless. It was then that a player on the other side of the table broke the silence with an ironic comment. "Looks like the game has turned, huh?" The surrounding audience started laughing. The billionaire clenched his fists on the table. His face turned red. He wasn't used to losing, much less being publicly humiliated. He tried to force a smile, tried to appear indifferent, but it was clear to everyone there. He wasn't in control of anything. The dealer started pushing chips towards Snoop Dogg. Stacks and stacks of chips piled up in front of him, the biggest victory of the night, and all this without having to say a single offensive word. The billionaire looked around, realizing that all the attention was on him now, and not in the way he liked. Before, he was the center of attention because he was the richest, most powerful person in the room. Now he was the man who just got defeated in style. And by whom? By someone he didn't think should even be sitting at that table. He tugged at the collar of his shirt, as if the room was suddenly too hot. His hands were shaking slightly, and he quickly hid them under the table. But none of this went unnoticed. People were observing every detail. What hurt most, however, was not the lost money. For a man with a fortune of that size, losing a few million was just a detail. The real problem was, or hit no ego. The billionaire spent years building his reputation, cultivating an image of being untouchable, of someone who always won, always had the upper hand. But there, at that moment, in front of dozens of people, he was put in his place. And Snoop Dogg knew exactly what was going on. He calmly picked up one of the chips, twirled it between his fingers, and then placed it back on the table. Finally, he looked directly at the billionaire and smiled slightly. "Respect is the most valuable currency there is," he said slowly, letting each word be absorbed by the silence that took over the table. That hit the billionaire like an invisible punch. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Pride wouldn't allow him to admit defeat, but there was nothing he could do. The night that began with arrogance, with mocking laughter and provocations, now ended with a lesson that he would never forget. The surrounding players began to stand up, some still talking amongst themselves about what they had just witnessed. People around the table tried to contain their laughter, while others walked away, shaking their heads in disbelief. It was as if a movie had just taken place there right before everyone's eyes. What happened after that made the night end in an even more surprising way. The billionaire was still paralyzed, trying to process what had just happened. His face, once radiant with confidence and arrogance, was now rigid, his eyes fixed on the table as if he could find some explanation for his own defeat. But there was no mistake, no cheating, no mistake. He simply lost, and lost badly. The surrounding room was buzzing with reactions. Some observers were still in shock, others couldn't hide discreet smiles, and the more daring ones laughed quietly, exchanging knowing glances. That moment would be remembered for a long time. It wasn't just about money. It was about pride, about status, about the feeling of being on top of the world and, in the blink of an eye, being thrown to the ground. Snoop Dogg, on the other hand, was exactly the same as when he entered the table. Calm, relaxed, as if none of it had been a big effort. He took one of the chips he had just won, turned it between his fingers, and without taking his eyes off the billionaire, let out a slight smile. "I think the game has changed, right?" The phrase echoed in the tense silence that still hung in the air. It was simple, it was direct, and it was devastating. It wasn't a victory cry, it wasn't an exaggeration, it was just a cruel observation of reality. The billionaire blinked a few times, as if trying to absorb the humiliation. His body was tense, his jaw clenched. He tried to open his mouth to say something, but no words came out. For the first time all night, he didn't have an answer. Snoop Dogg leaned forward a little, still holding the file between his fingers, and without looking away, added, "Next time, choose your bets. And your words better." By now, the entire casino was already focused on the scene. Players from other tables had gathered to watch the outcome of the epic confrontation. Casino employees exchanged glances with each other, and even the normally impassive security guards seemed to hold back so as not to react. The billionaire took a deep breath and looked around. For the first time, he realized that was no longer the center of admiration in that place. People were no longer laughing with him, but at him. That look of superiority he always carried no longer existed. He grabbed the glass of whiskey next to him, took a quick sip, as if trying to compose himself, and then forcefully placed it back on the table. But the damage was already done. His name, his image, his aura of absolute power had been destroyed in just a few minutes. So, without saying anything, he stood up. It was a quick, almost desperate movement. He adjusted his tie, smoothed the lapel of his suit, as if trying to physically recover from the emotional blow he had just suffered. But none of that helped. His body said what he was trying to hide. He was devastated. As he started to walk away from the table, some people made room, but no one looked at him with the same reverence as before. The respect he thought he had, which in reality only came from fear and money, had evaporated. Snoop Dogg remained seated, calmly watching as the billionaire left. For him, it was not a question of money nor of showing superiority. It was about respect. And that night, life showed in the most poetic way possible that true power was not in who bet the highest, but in who knew when and how to play. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone being humiliated and then getting revenge in an epic way? Or have you ever been in a situation where someone's arrogance was punished at the right time? Tell me in the comments, because I read each one and I want to know your opinion on this story. The billionaire walked through the casino hall with hurried steps, trying to escape the eyes that followed him from all sides. The man who, minutes ago, was brimming with arrogance now seemed smaller, as if the weight of humiliation had bent his shoulders. He didn't look back, he didn't respond to anyone, he just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. But there was nowhere to run. Shame followed him like a shadow. People still murmured, Some laughed discreetly, others just watched in disbelief at the fate of a man who, until then, seemed invincible. Casino security, who had always treated him with deference, now just watched him pass by. No escort, no booze, no red carpets. The only thing that remained was the awkward silence that surrounded him. Snoop Dogg, in turn, remained seated at the table, no rush, no fuss, just enjoying the moment. He didn't need to scream. He didn't need to get excited. His attitude, his fair play, and his confidence did the job for him. True power was in patience, intelligence, and above all, respect. He picked up a glass of whiskey that was in front of him, swirled the liquid slowly, and brought it to his mouth, taking a calm sip. As he placed the glass on the table, he took one last look at the exit of the casino, where the billionaire was disappearing through the imposing doors. Karma had taken its toll. The players around the table finally began to move, as if the enchantment of that moment was dissipating. Someone let out a long whistle, another laughed as he collected his own chips. The casino was slowly returning to normal, but everyone knew that that night would not be forgotten anytime soon. One of the players, still trying to process everything, looked at Snoop Dogg and shook his head, laughing. "Man, you play like a real king." Snoop just smirked and shrugged. "I play on my own time. That was the truth. The billionaire lost because he played out of ego. He wanted to humiliate. He wanted to impose his dominance. He wanted to prove that money made him untouchable. But in poker, as in life, those who don't know how to control their emotions are doomed to failure. This story teaches us something very important. How often do we see people being judged by their appearance? How many times does someone try to put someone down, thinking they are better because they have more money, more status, or more influence? The billionaire thought he was in control, but fate showed that no one is above the law of life. Respect is always worth more than any bank account. And that's why this story is so impactful. Because it's not just about a poker game, it's not just about money, it's about character. If you have followed this story this far, it is because you believe in the power of justice and know that respect is worth more than any luxury the world goes around. And this story showed exactly that. Today, it was the billionaire who learned this lesson the hard way. But how many times in our lives have we seen people thinking they can step on others, only to later discover that fate doesn't forgive? Now, I want to see who really stayed until the end. Comment below. Respect is worth more than luxury. Just so I know that you are with me and a part of this community that values the best stories of comeback and poetic revenge, I read all the comments and make a point of seeing who really follows every detail. It is clear. Don't forget to leave a like, because this really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring more epic stories like this. If you haven't signed up yet, now is the time. Activate the bell so you don't miss any unbelievable twists and click on the next video that appears on the screen. I'm sure the next story will surprise you even more.